The press conference room fell silent as the white reporter from Alabama leaned into his microphone, a smirk playing across his lips. "So Cassius," he said, deliberately using the name Muhammad Ali had abandoned years ago, "when are you going to admit you're nothing more than a loudmouth boxer who got lucky? You talk like you're educated, but we all know you barely finished high school. Tell us, how does it feel to pretend you're smarter than you actually are?" What this arrogant journalist didn't know was that he was about to face the greatest mind in sports history, and what happened in the next 7 minutes would expose his prejudice in the most humiliating way possible and prove that Muhammad Ali's sharpest weapon wasn't his fists, it was his brilliant mind. Before we dive into this incredible story of the greatest destroying ignorance with intelligence, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. If you believe that wisdom doesn't come from diplomas, but from life experience and relentless learning, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that prove you should never underestimate the power of quiet brilliance. Now let's get into what really happened when Muhammad Ali walked into that New York press conference in 1968 and changed everything. It was a humid July afternoon in Manhattan when Muhammad Ali pushed through the revolving doors of the Hilton Hotel on 6th Avenue. The lobby buzzed with reporters, cameras, and the electric tension that always surrounded Ali. Today's press conference had been arranged to discuss his upcoming fight against Jerry Quarry, his first bout since the government stripped him of his boxing license for refusing to fight in Vietnam. Ali wore a simple dark suit, nothing flashy, just a clean white shirt and thin black tie. His face showed the wear of 30 months in exile, 30 months of legal battles, death threats, and being called a traitor by half of America. But his eyes still carried that unmistakable spark of intelligence and confidence. The press conference room was packed with over 100 journalists from every major publication. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red lights glowing. Among the crowd sat James Patterson, a 47-year-old journalist from the Birmingham Register, one of Alabama's most conservative newspapers. Patterson had built his career defending segregation and attacking civil rights activists. He'd written dozens of columns condemning Ali as a coward and fraud. Patterson sat in the third row, his notebook open, questions already prepared. He'd spent weeks crafting what he considered his most devastating attack. Questions designed to expose Ali as an uneducated athlete who'd gotten too big for his britches. Patterson believed that once Ali was cornered with questions about politics and law, the facade would crumble. But Patterson had made a critical mistake. He'd never actually listened to Muhammad Ali speak. Not really. He'd read the headlines, watched the 30-second clips, heard the sound bites, but he'd never truly listened to the depth and intelligence in Ali's words. He was about to get an education. That's when everything changed. Also in the room sat Sarah Martinez, a 26-year-old reporter for the Village Voice, one of the few Latina journalists covering sports in 1968. She sensed something big was about to happen. The tension felt different today, more hostile, more dangerous. In the back row stood Robert Williams, a 62-year-old black journalist who'd been covering sports since the 1930s. He'd watched Ali grow from a skinny kid in Louisville to heavyweight champion. He'd also watched America try to destroy him for having the courage to say no. Williams pulled out his tape recorder, knowing this moment needed to be preserved. The moderator tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We'll begin with a brief statement from Mr. Ali, then open the floor to questions." Muhammad Ali stood slowly, his 6'3" frame unfolding with distinctive grace. He looked out at the sea of faces, some friendly, most hostile. When he spoke, his voice carried that rhythmic quality that had made him famous. "Thank you all for coming today. I know many of you have questions about my return to boxing, about the legal battles, about my beliefs. I'm here to answer honestly, just like I always have. I'm not afraid of questions. I'm not afraid of truth. And I'm not afraid of people who think they can break me down with words. I've been fighting with my mouth and my mind a lot longer than I've been fighting with my fists. The last sentence hung in the air, like a warning shot. Sarah Martinez felt her pulse quicken. Ali wasn't here to play nice, but nobody was prepared for what happened next. The moderator gestured to the crowd. We'll now take questions. James Patterson didn't wait. He stood up abruptly, his southern accent cutting through the room. James Patterson, Birmingham Register. I've got a question for Cassius. Ollie's jaw tightened slightly at the use of his former name, but his expression remained calm. My name is Muhammad Ali. I changed it 6 years ago, and I'd appreciate if you'd respect that, sir. Patterson's smirk widened. Well, that's part of my question. See, Cassius. I'm sorry, Muhammad. You talk about respect and dignity. You quote the Constitution like you're some legal scholar. But we all know the truth, don't we? You barely graduated high school. You've never set foot in a college classroom. You make your living getting punched in the head. So my question is, when are you going to stop pretending you're an educated man and admit you're just a boxer who got lucky and learned how to run his mouth? The room went dead silent. Several journalists gasped. Sarah Martinez's hand flew to her mouth. Even the moderators looked shocked. This wasn't journalism. This was a public execution attempt. But Muhammad Ali didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. Instead, something remarkable happened. Ali smiled. Not a mocking smile, not angry, but the patient smile of a chess master who'd just watched his opponent make a fatal mistake. The room erupted in whispers, but Ali wasn't finished. Mr. Patterson, Ali said, his voice calm and measured. That's a very interesting question. In fact, it reveals more about you than it does about me. But I'll answer it, because everyone in this room and everyone watching at home deserves to understand something important about education, intelligence, and wisdom. Ali took a step forward, commanding every eye. You say I barely graduated high school. That's true. You know why? Because I was too busy training to become the Olympic gold medalist and heavyweight champion of the world. You say I never set foot in a college classroom. That's also true. You know what I did instead? I studied the Quran. I studied the Constitution of the United States, the real one, not the selective version some people quote when it suits them. I read Frederick Douglass, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and W. Webb Du Bois. I studied history, philosophy, and law because I had to. Because when you're a black man in America who refuses to stay quiet, you better know your rights, or they'll disappear faster than you can say Jim Crow. Patterson's face had gone from confident to pale. His notebook sat forgotten in his hands. Ali continued, his voice building with poetic intensity. You want to talk about education, Mr. Patterson? Let's talk about it. Education isn't just sitting in a classroom, memorizing facts. Education is asking questions, seeking truth, and having the courage to think for yourself. I may not have a college degree, but I can quote the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments from memory. Can you? I can explain the difference between de jure and de facto segregation. Can you? I can tell you why Plessy versus Ferguson was wrong, and why Brown versus Board of Education didn't go far enough. Can you? Sarah Martinez was scribbling frantically, trying to capture every word. This wasn't just a response. This was a masterclass in dignity and self-education. Robert Williams had tears in his eyes. He'd spent 40 years watching talented black athletes be dismissed as simple-minded. Today, he was watching one of them dismantle that stereotype with nothing but truth and brilliance. Then Ali delivered the knockout blow. You said, I make my living getting punched in the head. That's partially true. But you know what else I do? I negotiate million-dollar contracts without a business degree. I understand tax law well enough to know when accountants are stealing from me. I've studied nutrition and physiology because I need to know how my body works at the highest level. I've learned about media manipulation because I've watched people like you try to destroy my reputation for years. Ollie paused, letting his words sink in. But here's what really bothers me about your question, Mr. Patterson. You didn't ask me about boxing. You didn't ask about my training or strategy. You immediately went after my intelligence, my right to speak on serious issues. Why? Because you can't imagine that a black boxer could possibly be smart. You can't conceive that someone who makes their living with their body could also have a sharp mind. That's not just ignorance, Mr. Patterson. That's racism dressed up as journalism. The final word, racism, hung in the air like a thunderclap. Patterson's face turned bright red. His hands were shaking. He'd come to humiliate Ollie, and instead, Ollie had calmly, methodically, brilliantly exposed Patterson's prejudice for the entire nation to see. But Ollie wasn't done. Instead of twisting the knife, he offered something unexpected. Grace, Mr. Patterson, I don't think you're a bad man. I think you're a product of where you came from, just like I am. You grew up in Alabama, taught that people who look like me are inferior. I grew up in Louisville, taught that I could be anything I wanted if I worked hard enough. We both learned lessons from our environments. The difference is, I questioned what I was taught. I tested it against reality. I grew. The question I have for you is, are you willing to do the same? The press conference room had gone completely silent. Every person sat frozen, watching this extraordinary moment. James Patterson stood with his mouth slightly open, unable to respond. He'd been given a choice: admit his prejudice and grow, or double down on ignorance. After what felt like an eternity, Patterson slowly sat down. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge Ollie's points, but he also didn't ask another question. His silence spoke volumes. The moderator found his voice. Any other questions? Hands shot up all over the room, but the tone had completely changed. Reporters weren't asking attack questions anymore. They were treating Ollie like the intelligent, thoughtful man he'd always been. Sarah Martinez got called on. Mr. Ali, how did you develop such deep understanding of constitutional law? Ollie's face softened into a genuine smile. Thank you for that question, ma'am. When the government tried to draft me, I knew I needed to understand every aspect of the law if I was going to fight back. So I read everything I could find. I talked to lawyers, professors, activists. I asked questions until I understood not just what the law said, but why it said it. See, education isn't something that stops when you leave school. Real education is a lifelong pursuit. Every day I learn something new, and every day I try to be smarter than I was yesterday. Robert Williams raised his hand, voice thick with emotion. Mr. Ali, what you just did here today, educating while defending yourself with grace, do you understand how important that is for young people watching? Ali nodded slowly, expression turning serious. Mr. Williams, that's exactly why I do it. There are millions of young black kids told every day that they're not smart enough, not worthy enough. They're told sports and music are their only options. I want them to see me standing here, speaking my mind, using my brain as effectively as I use my fists. I want them to know you don't need permission to be intelligent. You don't need a diploma to be wise. You just need curiosity, courage, and the willingness to never stop learning. The press conference continued for another 30 minutes, but the awakening had already occurred. As the room began to clear, something remarkable happened. Several reporters approached Ali to shake his hand and apologize for the hostility. Young journalists thanked him for standing up to Patterson with intelligence rather than anger. James Patterson gathered his things quickly. avoiding eye contact. As he headed toward the exit, he passed Sarah Martinez, who couldn't help herself. "Mr. Patterson, are you going to write about what happened today?" Patterson stopped, jaw clenched. "I'll write what I came here to write, which is that Ali is a draft dodger and troublemaker." Sarah shook her head sadly. "You were given a gift today, a chance to see beyond your prejudices, to recognize brilliance standing right in front of you, and you're going to waste it. That's not journalism, Mr. Patterson. That's cowardice." Patterson opened his mouth, but no words came. He simply turned and walked out, carrying his prejudices like a heavy suitcase he refused to put down. Meanwhile, Robert Williams approached Ali. "Mr. Ali, I've never seen anything like what you did today. You could have destroyed that man. Instead, you educated him, and all of us." Ali placed a hand on Williams's shoulder. "Mr. Williams, destruction is easy. Any fool can tear something down. Building something up, changing someone's mind, that's hard. That's what takes real strength." As Muhammad Ali walked out of the Hilton Hotel that afternoon, he left behind more than a memorable press conference. He'd proven that true intelligence isn't measured by degrees or diplomas, but by the depth of your knowledge, the breadth of your curiosity, and the courage to speak truth when powerful people want you silent. The footage would be replayed for decades. Patterson's question and Ali's response would become required viewing in journalism schools and civil rights classes. It became a perfect example of how to confront prejudice with dignity, how to turn an attack into a teaching moment. Sarah Martinez would become one of the most respected investigative journalists of her generation, always remembering Ali's lesson: never let someone else's limited imagination define your capabilities. Robert Williams would write his most powerful column that evening, titled "The Day I Watched Intelligence Knock Out Ignorance." And James Patterson, he continued writing his hateful columns for another decade, never acknowledging what happened, never growing, but his influence faded while Ali's only grew stronger. Because that's what happens when you choose ignorance over education, prejudice over understanding. You become a footnote in history, while the people you tried to diminish become legends. Muhammad Ali proved that day that his greatest weapon was never his left jab or his footwork. It was his mind, his words, his unshakable belief that he deserved respect simply because he was human. And no diploma, no degree, no credential mattered more than that fundamental truth.